Okay, and this really tells you what the elements are and goes into it.
Turns out that a lean startup consists of three components. One is business model design, two is customer development, and three is agile engineering. And these three components help startups become incredibly efficient, reducing the amount of time to get the first product and reducing the amount of cash necessary to build that product. So in a lean startup, we really know something quite different than a large company. In a lean startup, we know that you just don't execute per plan. You're actually going to be learning and discovering from customers outside your office. You kind of know that there are no facts inside your building, so you're going to get the heck outside. We also know that you're not smarter than the collective intelligence of your potential customers. So what we're going to do is put together a process that allows you to rapidly learn by getting out of the building and testing some of your key ideas and key features of the product as quickly and as rapidly as we can. And what you're going to find is a good number of your initial hypotheses are just simply wrong. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to start with writing down all the hypotheses. And the common framework we use is Alexander Osterwalder's business model canvas. This 9-box diagram puts all the hypotheses about your business. Who are the customers? What are you building for them? What's the channel? How are you going to reach them? How are you going to make money? And puts them in a single page. So it's going to provide a framework and then a scorecard for us to see how we're doing. But unlike just doing strategy in a large company, you're going to take these hypotheses and go outside the building and actually test them. Not test them randomly, but test them with a formal process called customer development. What we're going to do is design experiments, run the experiments outside the building, get the data, and look for insights. And in fact, the way we're going to actually get insights is by showing customers either PowerPoint, wireframes, clay models, prototypes, at any stage we can to actually gather as much information as we can about their feedback. And one of the things we're going to find out is that there are two unique things we do in a lean startup. One is when our hypotheses turn out to be incorrect, instead of firing people, we actually get to change those hypotheses. And these are called pivots. A pivot is defined as a substantive change to one or more of the business model canvas components. If it's a minor change, we call it an iteration. And so in a normal company or an old-fashioned startup, we'd fire the VP of sales if their assumptions were wrong. Here what we're doing is firing the plan. Not only does this work for startups, it actually works for large companies as well. We work with General Electric, one of the smartest big companies in the world. And GE was about to commercialize some of their high-temperature sulfur battery technology. And they wanted to offer these batteries to other companies for industrial applications. And they had done a great market research report and had pages of here's where the product should go. And the CEO was going to give the general manager, Prescott Logan, $100 million to just go build a factory and go execute, hire the staff and whatever. We have the technology and here's the report. But Prescott luckily said, you know, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like an existing business. This feels like a startup. And we ought to check our hypotheses. And so Prescott Logan and his customer development team flew around to almost every continent, in fact, every continent in the world, including Antarctica, and discovered that the requirements actually differed by industry segments. Substantially enough is that if they would have had a standard factory making standard product, they would have sold none of them. Because different customers require different packaging, different cooling, different connectors, and none of this was visible from inside the building. After 18 months, they figured out who the customers were, what they wanted, and then built the factory. And now, a couple of years later, they have backlogs for the next 3 years. And so what we now know is that no business plan survives first contact with customers. That means we wouldn't know whether we were right or wrong until after we shipped the product and customers gave us feedback. And by then, we've burned lots of time, lots of money, and potentially are out of business. But imagine if you had a process that allowed you to quickly iterate and incrementally build the product a piece at a time for each increment, learning and discovering whether you were on the right track. What's the right track? Do you have the right customers for the right features, which we call product market fit? Do you have the right distribution channel? Do you have the right revenue model, right pricing, partners? Do you understand your costs? We have a process now to test each one of these incrementally, cheaply, and quickly. And that's what the whole lean startup model is about.
And this basically is what we do in our courses. The students are in teams. They start with a whole bunch of ideas. They winnow them down into just 5 for each team. Then they go out and do surveys to get the opinion of outsiders, even though they're not required to do it mathematically and pick the one that got the most votes. They can overrule it. It's up to them. And then they go out and they start talking to people about, they decide what the product looks like and how it's going to work. They go out and start validating it in the marketplace. And it's really interesting to watch because the more they learn, the better they get. So we'll forge ahead here. So why the fast growth for Lean Launchpad? I'm sure a lot of you have heard about Moore's Law. Gordon Moore was one of the founders of Intel, and he was talking about the fact that the number of transistors and resistors on a 1-inch square chip doubles every 18 months. And you can see they had plotted the different chips, and they were plotting speed versus the increase efficiency, meaning lower cost. So there's a book that was published a couple years ago by Peter Diamandis called Bold. And he's one of these very forward-thinking guys and has owned several space-related companies. And in the book, he showed examples of the impact of improvements in speed, which is a good thing, times the reductions in cost, which is a good thing, yields an X-fold improvement during the period being measured. And in his case, they were measuring a 40-year period between, I think, 1962 and 1972. Now, it wouldn't be 40 years, whatever it was. And so what do you suppose they came up with when they multiplied those two numbers together? What was the impact of those numbers? You want to take a guess? Somebody take a wild guess, because it is pretty wild. Please. 200. Okay. Okay. What do you? Were you really? Okay. Well, keep that thought. Anybody else have a guess? That's a little bit on the low side. In fact, it's a lot on the low side. Well, now, wait a minute. That's not the answer. This was the highest answer I was able to, quote, beat out of my class, just to get an answer, and they guessed 10 billion. The real answer is 100 billion. So imagine in a 40-year period an overall improvement of 100 billion. That's explaining why we now are doing AI, we're doing all of these things that lead to exponential businesses, exponential growth. And that can be traced back to what's been going on here. And what that is allowing is disruptive innovation, which is, the example is given of some kid in Africa with a cell phone is able to hook into an AI source and verbally describe what he wants, and the AI source turns it into a model, and that's fed into a printer, not a printer of type and stuff, but what am I looking for? Yeah, exactly. And so, it's just a different world now, and people are so empowered by the new technology. Any questions? Comments? Okay, I'm gonna, this is just about right. End this with a few comment, well, a very quick comment from, you know who that is? Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple. Oops. Guess I gotta do something over here.
You tend to get the world is the way it is, and your life is just a life.
I clicked it twice.
When you grow up, you tend to get told that the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world, try not to bash into the walls too much, try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. That's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you.
Remember
you
that.
You can change it, you can influence it, you can build your own things that other people can use. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same again. Yeah.
Jobs, of course, he and Wozniak were the founders of Apple, but they had a third guy early in the game. Anybody know who that was? I don't remember his name either, but he had put some money in early, and he began to get very nervous about was he going to lose his money, because they were in a kind of a tight spell at the time, and he hated Jobs. The two just did not get along. So he went to Jobs and said, I'd like to sell my stock back to you or to the company. And so it was his $800, and so they gave him his money back, even though the company probably wasn't worth that much money at the time. And today, were he still holding on to those shares, he'd be worth in the tens of millions of dollars. Can you imagine the conversation between his wife and him about that once that became evident? It would be a very unpleasant situation. But nonetheless, these things happen. Okay, well, it's been a pleasure spending some time with you, and I appreciate your attention. Thank you. And good luck to all of you.